Creating with Purpose. The guests I have today, I want to say first, thank you for coming.
Absolutely.
I
Thanks for having me.
really admire you because you're not only an artist, an incredible artist, but you're also an entrepreneur. For those who don't know, Meaghan founded her own theater company. And before going to the journey of founding it, I want to ask you about you.
Yeah.
How did Meaghan discover theater?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I have been doing theater like what feels like my whole life. I started with like church pageants. So my first role was as a sheep in the nativity play, and I was like 3. And then I was really lucky that like my elementary school had like school musicals and that sort of thing. So I did those, and then was introduced through that to community theater. So I was like really involved with like all of the extracurriculars kind of through elementary school and high school. And then I wasn't until I was like in grade 11 when I was like, you know what, this might be like a job that I could do. And that was when I kind of started to go like, okay, I think I'm gonna take this seriously as something that like I want to pursue, long term. But yeah, so that's like how I got to theater, and like where I started was like kind of how a lot of people start with the arts is like you get introduced to it through school and through community, and then you just stick with it.
Yeah, and how did you decided to like do your own theater company?
Yeah, so I bounced around to a couple of different schools for post-secondary education, and all in theater, but like different areas. So I spent some time at George Brown for like classical theater, and then I went to Sheridan and I did some tech stuff. Figured out very quickly that was not for me. Then I went to Randolph for musical theater. And while I was there, I attended through the pandemic. So I was doing musical theater school from my parents' living room, which do not recommend, but wasn't like, you still learn things. And one of the things that they tell you in theater school is like, when you graduate and you're trying to break into the industry, like they use the term break in. So I've always thought of it as like a house. And I was like, why do I have to break in? Like, why do I have to bust a window? Why do I have to sneak in the back door? Why isn't there a front door to the industry? Why isn't there like a pathway for people who want to do this for like the period between graduating from your post-secondary education and doing it professionally, right? Like having it be your full-time job. And so I graduated, and I figured out while I was in school that what I really loved was directing. And there is quite literally no pathway for directors in the theater industry. There's no set, this is how you do this. And so the comment in school was always like, you're going to end up making your own work. And so I graduated, and I was going like, where is this front door? Why doesn't it exist? Why is there no pathway for me as somebody who wants to be a director to do that? And so I just kind of was like, well, I guess we're doing it. I guess I'm starting my own company in order to make it happen. So it was never like I never started out with the idea of like, I'm going to like grow up and make my own theater company. It was made more out of necessity than anything. And I was like, hey, I want to direct this show. And it was like at a Halloween party that I didn't invite friends to. And I was like, is anybody interested in like working on this as a producer, like working to help me do this? And it was actually one of my roommate's friends who I've now become really close friends with, and she's my business partner. And she was like, yeah, send me like a full detailed proposal and I'm in. And so I did. And it was like within a couple of months, we were like holding auditions and putting the thing together. And we've been figuring it out like ever since.
Wow. And I'm talking about the beginnings of your years. I know it comes with many challenges. Also a lot of like happiness and rewarding things, but one thing that they always talk when you start a business is about keeping it like financially speaking. So how has that been for you?
Yeah, it's a journey. I'll be frank, like theater is expensive.
Yeah.
And there are very few, like there's a lot of grants out there. The problem is that there are also a lot of theater companies out there who are competing for those same grants. And a lot of the grants that are available have very specific criteria. So for example, with Sunbeam, we can't apply to any of the like operating grants because we don't have enough money already in our bank account to apply for those. So we can only apply for project grants. We haven't done that yet. It's in the to-do list. But so like grants isn't really like an option. And it's certainly not something that you can rely on because, you know, even if you're applying just for the project grants, you know, they're up to $20,000, but you might not get all $20,000. And you're also competing against like the other 150 indie theater companies in the city for that money, right? So a lot of it is fundraising. Like I would say 90% of my job is fundraising and like finding ways to make money for the company. So we started with like, I did a Christmas concert in Niagara at the church I grew up at, and they let me use the space for free. And that was like a huge help. And so it was mostly like family and friends who donated to like get it off the ground. And then we did like a couple of like show specific fundraiser events. And then the other thing that we do is we seek sponsorships. So existing businesses who are willing to put money forward essentially as part of their advertising budget. They'll give us, you know, $1,000 and we'll put their name and logo on our program and check them out on social media. And that goes towards covering the costs of putting on a show. Because the biggest thing with putting on a show is venue. Like that's the biggest expense. So it's both performance venue and rehearsal venue. Because the first show that we did was Romeo and Juliet. And we had swords in that show. So like some scenes you can rehearse in your living room and everybody's happy to do that. But you can't use swords in your living room. So we had to, you know, rent rehearsal space for that and then also rent performance space. And I think we spent like $7,000 on just space on that first show. Thankfully, we've like worked with different venues and we've had better deals since. But that's often where I make, when I reach out to sponsors and they say, hey, where's this money going? I'm like, you're making sure that we can have a safe rehearsal space. Yeah. You're making sure that we have a venue to perform in. And then the company is currently entirely run by volunteers. So it's myself and board of directors, and we're doing all of like the legwork and the back end stuff. And then all of our performers, creative team, all of those people, they get paid through a profit share basis. Oh. So once we cover all of the expenses that we've, you know, incurred to put on the show, you know, there's $1,000 left. Great. That gets divvied up amongst everybody. Hey, worked on it. So now we're in our third year of operation. You know, a portion of that money every show comes back to Sunbeam for us to be able to continue to grow what we do and have a little bit more of a nest egg to like start the next thing a little bit bigger and the next thing a little bit bigger. Yeah. As well as like the more people know that we exist, the more people come out to stuff, the more we have like a donor base and a subscriber base and people who are going to come to the shows. So all of those things like contribute to existing financially, but like there are moments where, you know, we need these costumes for this show. And I'm like, great, I'll pay for it and I'll get paid back once the show is done. Or even like the show that we did last summer, there were a couple of props that we needed. And the director of that show was like, I'll just pay for them. And then we were like, yeah, if you pay for them, you keep them at the end of the show, go right ahead. Or like people will donate or like let us use, like for Romeo and Juliet, we used the kitchen table that's at my mom's house, was part of our set. My diner and chairs were part of the set, right? So you just kind of, you get scrappy and you use what you have available to you in order to reduce costs, in order to like make sure that you are financially viable.
Yeah, of course. And you talk about like the board of directors and the team. How do you choose who to work with? Like, what are your like kind of things that you're like, oh, I would love to work with this person?
Yeah. So our mandate is for emerging artists. So emerging is like a very wide-ranging word. People have very different definitions of emerging. The way that I see emerging is people who have not yet become a recognizable name in the industry. So, for example, we had an actor, he is in our production of Romeo and Juliet. He was a Dora-nominated performer, but like, if you went to Crow's Theater, they're not going to know his name. right? And the other thing that I think of is like, you can be somebody who's established in your field as an actor, but you're like, hey, I think I want to try lighting design. Great, you're an emerging lighting designer because you don't have the experience, you don't have professional credits in that space. You're not recognized in that way. So you come to us and you try that for the first time. Yeah, so that's part of the mix, is also like finding the balance of people who have, a handful of credits versus people who haven't done much yet. But that's always the goal, is like working towards providing opportunities to people who are new in this career as like a professional space. So that's like the number one criteria, is that we're always looking for people who are like young blood on the scene, who are the fresh new people. And then in terms of like the board of directors, the board of directors is voted on every year at the AGM, annual general meeting. I use all these terms and then I'm like, right, people don't know what these words mean. So when you're a nonprofit, you have to have an annual general meeting and you have a membership. So we have like a really small membership to start out with. Members pay a membership fee, and those are your dues, and your dues help cover things like our internet domain, and like if we had a building and we needed to pay rent, that's like what the membership fees go towards. And then you get perks for being a member, so whether that's like discounted tickets or first priority over like positions or like auditions or that kind of thing. But so the membership will vote on positions within the board of directors. Now, not everybody on the board of directors is up for election every year. So for example, I am the president of the board. So my term is 2 years. So I was voted into that position last year. So I won't be voted on this year, but it'll be next year. I could run for re-election, or I could say, I'm not interested. Somebody might challenge me for election. Like, it all depends. So what ended up happening was last year at our AGM, I feel like I got really lucky because it was mostly people that I know who were in attendance, who are our members, who were voting on it. And then people just, you nominate yourself for a position.
Yeah.
And you say, hey, this is the job that I want. This is why I think I'd be good in this job. And then the membership votes privately and says, yeah, we think you're good at this job and we want you in this position. Okay. So right now we only have 5 members of the board of directors. We can have up to 10 based on like when we incorporate with the government, what we said. We can have up to 10, but right now I am currently the president, and then I have my kind Erin Clapperton is our vice president. We have Cheyenne Chenowstrup, who's my co-founder, is our treasurer. My little brother is our secretary. Shout out to Jacob. And he's great to have on the team because he is in school for labor studies and like HR, and so he brings that kind of more like legal HR brain into.
I have a question for you.
Yeah,
you're the co-founder, but you're also the president, and I know that there is this saying that when you're an entrepreneur, you don't have a schedule. You're working like 24/7. How does that affect your mental health? Like,
I don't know, man. I just do it.
Do you feel a way to balance it?
I like being busy.
Okay.
I could probably improve my sleep schedule. I am known for, like, people will get my email at 8 a.m. And I won't reply until noon because I'm sleeping in until 11, and I actually wrote the email at like 2 a.m. and I sent it for 8. But like part of that is also, and not necessarily that it is a healthy thing so much as it's the way that it is, right? Like I think that's true for a lot of creative fields where the expectations or the belief system within the industry is that you have to have this like grind mindset all the time. And like that's definitely part of it. Like if I'm being completely honest, like that is part of what I do, is that like I eat, sleep, and breathe theater, and so I would be on the subway frantically writing emails on my phone to get things done. But I think you just have to be like really purposeful about carving out time for yourself and knowing like, okay, I need to step back from this. So it's really lovely to have the board and have people be really involved in that way, because then I can delegate and I can say, you know what, my plate's full. I don't have capacity for this. Does somebody else have the ability to reach out to this person or send this email or follow up with that person, because I can't today. And my team was really, really great at like being able to step in and finding somebody who can take that over, which is really lovely. But yeah, and the other thing is like, as of right now, we only really do like one show a year. Mm-hmm. And that's also to kind of save all of our mental health because we don't get paid, right? Like we get paid when we're working on the show. If you are under contract as a member of that show, you'll get, you know, part of that profit share at the end, but it's nowhere near comparable. And we're fully aware of this. And it's something that we'd love to be able to do, you know, to pay people more, to promise people a certain guaranteed amount, but it's just not feasible at this moment in time. But because we know that like you need to have a job in order to live in this city, in order to afford rent. Like we don't want you to have to be choosing between doing our show and like paying your rent. You know what I mean? And so by like trying to work with both like our creative team, our actors, our board to like be a little bit more flexible about like when we're scheduling things and like just kind of contorting things to make it work in that way. We also try to like respect like, okay, if you're at home, like you're at home, you're not at work.
Yeah.
Because that's something that's also like really important to me. I've had jobs where it's like you get an email at 11 p.m. and you like expect a reply back right away, and I'm like, no, I clocked out 3 hours ago. This is my at home time now. But that's why I'll often like, I was traveling from Niagara back to Toronto last night on the GO train, and I think I drafted like 8 emails, and it was like after 11 p.m. And I was like, great, I'm going to schedule send these for tomorrow for business hours, because I don't want anybody to feel pressured to like reply to me right away. It's like, no, it's okay. Take your time. If it's something that's like super urgent, I will call you. You know what I mean? And even then we try and avoid any kind of last minute, like, oh no, we need to call. It's a must deal with in this moment situation. So I think that's a lot of like, the mental health aspect is like making sure that you carve out that time for yourself, and having a team around me has really helped with that. And also just like having people in your sphere who you can talk to who aren't part of it. Like when I call my mom, I'm not talking about my theater company. You know what I mean? We're talking about other things. And so it's good to have a space where it's like, yeah, and this is where like the theater company gets left at the door, and we're talking about other things in this space, or we're doing other things here, so that it's not always like, it's always spinning in the back of my mind, but it's not always all consuming.
Yeah, especially because we are artists, we do this passionately, so we're always thinking about it, but sometimes it's very important to just do other things. What other things do you like to do? Like when you are like, okay,
I read a lot. And I read stuff like people are like, oh, I read, and they're like talking about like literary fiction. No, like I read romance novels. I read fantasy. Like I'm like, this is escapism at its finest. I'm a huge nerd, so I read fan fiction. I'm like, you know what? I want something comfortable and cozy that I can just like fall into this world, and I already know the characters, and I already know what's going on. I can turn my brain off and just enjoy the story. And so that's like, I would say the number one thing I do when I'm not like on to be working is I read. And then like normal people stuff, like I watch TV and I watch a movie, that kind of thing. I have like adult coloring books, so I'll color, or I'm like into arts and crafts, and like the Taylor Swift friendship bracelets. I have so many beads at my house, and so like I'll just sit and I'll like put something on Netflix and I'll just make bracelets for fun. Like, so those are kind of things like very much things where you get to turn your brain off a little bit and disconnect from like the activeness, and like the do not disturb function on your phone is your best friend when you need time to be like, no, this is you're going away. Sometimes I'll like plug my phone in the other room and I'll walk away from it, and I'll be like, no.
Yeah.
We're in a different space. We don't need to address this. We don't need to look at it. We don't need to respond to everything right away.
Of course. that's very important. Also, I know you have you're preparing a play for November, so if you could let us know a little bit more about it. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
For soul positions. So
Yeah. So we're doing Antigone, which is a play by Sophocles. So it's part of the Oedipus cycle. So most people know the story of Oedipus, the guy who slept with his mom and then plucked out his own eyeballs. So this is about his daughter, is like the main character of this story. So at the end of the traditional Oedipus story, like what you think of when you think of Oedipus, Oedipus and his mom wife, Jocasta, have 4 kids. They had 2 sons and 2 daughters. And the 2 sons have this big fight over who should become king, and they end up killing each other in this fight. And so then their uncle becomes king, and he says that the one son who had fought using the army of Thebes, which is where they are, is going to have like all of the proper funeral burial rites. And the other son is going to be left on the outskirts of the city and is not allowed to be buried. And if you provide funeral rites for him, you'll be put to death. And Antigone, who is the sister of both of these people, is like, that's not okay with me. I'm going to bury my brother. And so she puts kind of her uncle in this kind of awkward position of like, well, that's my niece, and she's engaged to my son because, you know, Greek plays. And she's now defying this direct order. And so, like, do I put her to death? Like, do I kill her? Or do I, like, find a different punishment? And how am I to be seen as a leader if I make this decision and all of that? And I'll leave the ending as a surprise for you to come see in November. But that's kind of, like, the plot of the show. And I started like envisioning this version of the show in 2019 when I was at Sheridan. I had a really great teacher, Thea, my theater history teacher, who for our final assignment had us pick one of the shows that we had talked about throughout the semester and write a grant application. And she said, like, a lot of theater is about why this show, why now? Like, why are you the person who should tell this story? And what do you think that this play has to say to people? Especially, like, this is a Greek play. This was written, like, 4,000 years ago. Why should we be putting it on in 2025? And unfortunately, I feel like this version of the show has become even more important in 2025 than it was in 2019, because it's about resistance, and it's about protest, and it's about speaking truth to power and standing up for what you believe in, and, you know, doing that at the risk of personal harm as well. Like, what are you willing to do, and what are you willing to risk for yourself to stand up for these things that you believe in? And so I had this concept of like, okay, what if it's set against like existing protests that we already know, that we're already familiar with? So the show is actually, it's set, you know, in Thebes in ancient times, but Thebes is standing in for the United States, and we're setting it in 1968 against the backdrop of all of the protests that were going on that year. That was the year where Martin Luther King was assassinated, RFK was assassinated. There were protests outside the Democratic National Convention that were anti-war protests against the Vietnam War. There were civil rights protests. It was a huge year for social movement, and in particular as well for students involved in social movement. And so that's like the setting and the world of the play that we're approaching it with, which I think is so relevant to everything right now. Like, there are so many protests going on. There are students who are having visas revoked in the United States. There are people who are having, you know, dealing with ICE for speaking their mind and at speaking truth to power and protesting for the things that they believe in, at great personal risk and at risk of great personal harm. And so I think this is really like the moment in time where this show is going to like hit home for a lot of people and be like, oh yeah, like what do I feel is important to stand up for? What am I willing to risk to raise my voice in that way? And so right now we're looking for a handful of creative team members. So I'm directing the show. And then my friend Shai and Alexa are going to be co-producing the show. So we're looking for an assistant director and movement director and stage management team. And And so once we have kind of all of our schedules locked in and all of those people locked in for the team, then we'll be announcing auditions. And then the show will be going up in November. So I'm really looking forward to like really digging into like the meat of the show, right? And figuring out what we can do with it, especially because we're using the original text. So we're not like with any classical text, you update, you change, you cut. But we're not like changing the location of the text. It's just that this location is standing in for this other space kind of idea. So I'm really looking forward to like digging into it and like getting into rehearsals and like chatting with creative team and building like what does this world actually look like, because I know what it looks like in my head, but then to have it materialize and have other people buy into the vision, I'm really looking forward to that whole process. It's one of my favorite parts of directing. I call it like creating the playground, or like creating the sandbox. And so you play in the sandbox, and sometimes you might, be like, hey, what if we think outside the box? And maybe we bring stuff into the sandbox, and maybe those things outside the sandbox. But I really like having to be a collaborative process and being like, okay, here's the space in which we play. What serves us, what doesn't serve us, and how do we tell this story in the most authentic and true way, while also communicating things that we feel are important and making sure that the audience walks away with like, oh, I have something to think about when I leave the theater.
Has there any been like other play that you have directed that has really resonated with you?
Yeah, the first show I did Romeo and Juliet to start, and I love that play. I'm a big sucker for Shakespeare, and I feel like Romeo and Juliet in particular has this reputation of like people are over it because it's been done 1,000 times, and I think that sometimes I get lost in, and this is not to discredit fantastic older actors who play these roles. However, sick and tired of like 35-year-old Romeo, because 35-year-old Romeo needs to get his crap together. 17-year-old Romeo, however, it makes sense that he doesn't have his crap together. And so, of course, like, you were performing the show with young adults, people generally in their early to mid-20s. But just, like, I feel like the proximity in age to these characters really makes a difference, because, like, Juliet is 13. She behaves like a 13-year-old. And sometimes that gets lost in the language and the mystique and the power of Shakespeare. And so I really worked with the actors to be like, no, I want this to feel very much like teenagers. I want this to feel very real, very authentic. They are experiencing these giant emotions. I don't know about your experience, but like when I was 13 and I saw a cute boy, I was like, that one, I'm gonna marry him. We're gonna have a beautiful long life together. And I absolutely would have married somebody 3 days after meeting them, because that's what 13-year-olds are like. Yeah. They don't have the forethought. They don't think things through. But that doesn't mean that it's not true for them in that moment. Yeah. They do feel like they're in love with that person. Yeah. It's not this fake, like, we look at it and go, oh, puppy love, how cute, how misguided. But when you're in it, when you're 13, you're like, no, this is it. This is my person. I must marry them. They are the human being that I need to be with for the rest of my life. And so I really wanted that to be communicated to the audience. And I also really wanted to emphasize, there's this line, it's kind of a throwaway line that Lord Capulet has in Act 2. And he says, so it's right after there's the whole show starts with this big fight, and the prince is like, hey, y'all gotta stop fighting. The next time somebody fights, you're gonna get banished. And Capulet, when speaking to Paris, who's a suitor to Juliet, says, like, I do not think it is so hard for men as old as we to keep the peace, when talking about himself and Romeo's dad, Montague. He's like, he essentially says, like, I really don't think it's that hard. Like, we have this feud between our families, but it's kind of like, we could just not, like, there's no ill will between us anymore. That doesn't actually exist. It's this like fabricated thing. And I think that just adds to the tragedy that these kids feel like they can't tell their parents who they love, feel like they have to go behind a parent's back, feel like they have to go to these extreme lengths to be with the person that they love. And so often throughout history, there's this repeated story of young people dying for an old man's grudge, right? Like I think of like any conflict that you can think of where there's, you know, an old man who's sitting in an office somewhere, and it's the young people who are on the front lines who are dying over this cause, whether they believe in it or not. And feeling like they can't go to that older generation and can't express themselves and feel like there is no other option. And so I really wanted to like stress that like this is a story that we've seen time and time again. So I set the show, I said like this is every time and no time, and the costumes kind of, you know, we're fighting with swords, but we're wearing jeans. Like this is both then and it is now. And I also wanted it to reflect like real people's lives. So like Romeo had a single mom, and I was just, she'll forgive me for saying this. My mom's best friend came to see the show, and she's a single parent. And it meant so much to me. After the show, I went up and I you know, was like, so what did you think? And she was crying, and she was so moved because she was like, yeah, that's me. Thank you for having a single mom of a son in this show and showing what that looks like. Because it resonated with her, and she was like, yeah, I know that feeling. I know that fear of losing your child, of not being connected to them because you're working so hard, because you're trying to provide for them as a single parent. I was like, oh, good. Like the message I was trying to communicate landed with someone, right? And I was very lucky that I had multiple people throughout the run of the show be like, oh yeah, this thing, like I felt it, including young people being like, oh yeah, no, like I actually feel represented in this show, that they can find the connection between their real lives and these characters instead of feeling like the 400 years between when they were written and now is as big a gap, because like it's a big gap, but also when you look at it in the span of human history, it's a very small period of time, right? And so it was like that show, both in terms of like my own personal journey with it, as well as like, okay, these are the things we're trying to communicate, and then like the audience response to it being like, yeah, they're picking up what we're putting down, was a really, really rewarding experience, and really like meant a lot to me throughout the whole process.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was the last play you could have?
So the last show we did was last summer, and we did a cabaret show called When I Grow Up. My dear friend, Jalen Gervais, she came to me and she was like, hey, so I know you started a company. I have this show that I want to do. How do I start a company to do this show? And I was like, point one, I have a company. You don't have to make a company to do this show. My company can help you do this show. And she was like, really? Okay, great. And so it was a cabaret show. So it was a mix of dance pieces and vignettes and songs. And the focus was this idea of girlhood and womanhood and growing up, and the kind of expectation on women as you grow up that you have to put away childish things. It's time to put down the toys. It's time to be responsible. It's time to take over. It's time to start managing the house. It's time to learn how to cook, put away the Barbies kind of idea. Whereas often, plenty of grown men plays video games and nobody bats an eye. And so it's this like kind of double standard of like, why are women told, okay, time to put the toys away, time to stop being a fan of Disney princesses, time to, put those things aside and be an adult. And so this idea that like we can reclaim that as adults. And I produced the show. And for me, like it really resonated coming out of like the year of the Barbie movie. And I was like coming out of that energy of this like, yeah, every girl goes through this phase with her like, I hate pink. I'm not like other girls. And then you're like, wait, actually, I like pink and I am like other girls, and that's a good thing. And it's not it doesn't detract from me to be like other girls, because I like other women and girls are great. And so it was this like idea that as you grow up, you don't have to give up on this idea of feeling like a princess. It might shift, it might change, you might have new dreams, but that doesn't mean that you have to get rid of those things or that those things are childish. And even if they are, it doesn't mean you have to give them up. Like, why not have that joy and that wonder and like the idea of getting ready? And like there was a number in the show that was this like sleepover with your friends and singing and dancing with your friends in your pajamas. I'm like, why don't we do that still? Like, why did we stop? Who told us that we had to stop? And why did we listen to them? Because we still are allowed to do that if we decide that we're allowed to do that. And so it was this really beautiful like show of this like just true like joy of like childhood wonder and girlhood and womanhood. And we had a beautiful ensemble of women who worked on the show, and it was a great time. Like it was truly one of the best theater experiences I've ever had, because everybody was constantly working towards this idea of joy and like childhood wonder, and like, what if we approach the world this way? What if we approach the world with this kindness and generosity and this willingness to like have fun, you know? So we did that show last August, and that was the last big show we did. And then we'll have Antigone this fall.
Well, finally, would you like to let us know like your social media, like where can we find the tickets?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me at Meaghan_Salmon on literally every platform ever. And then Sunbeam is at sunbeamtheater.co. Theater is spelled with an R-E because we're Canadian. And we post all of our like information about audition calls and tickets and everything will go up there. So tickets aren't on sale yet, but they will be soon. But that's where you can find all of our information is on our socials.
Oh, thank you so much for coming again, and
Thanks for having me.
nice to have you.
Absolutely. Thank you.